Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. We will start our plenary session on Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and Central Asia facing the Ukrainian war. I'm really happy to moderate this session because it's the first time, I think, that we have at the WPC the participant from post-Soviet countries. And I will come back on this definition of post-Soviet countries. I'm very glad to introduce Olga Roshka, Chief of Staff of the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration of Moldova, Roman Vasilenko, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, thank you to be here in person, and Lasha Darsalia, by video, First Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia. The Ukraine is the first victim of the Russian aggression, but other neighboring countries are also suffering from shocks at different levels. I think about the flow of migrants, I think about energy pressures by Russia. It should be noted that a great part of Kazakhstan gas passed by Caspian Pipeline Consortium through Russian territory. There are unresolved conflicts in Transnistria, in Moldova, in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, in Georgia, and there are many Russian speakers in the north of Kazakhstan. As we can notice, we didn't put in the title of this panel post-Soviet states. We preferred the long version, Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and Central Asia, with 3 countries, each represented here from this 3 geographical area, because 3 decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, the question arises about the coherence of this space. So my first question is about the relation of your countries with Soviet history and its influence on the national identity of your country today. And this question is not out of the scope, because we see that in order to anticipate the war and to understand Russia's intention, it is as important to understand Putin's vision of history as much to count the military equipments. We have 2 extreme examples today with Russia, where many Russians are nostalgic from Soviet Union and Stalin is the most popular historical figure. And on the opposite side, Ukraine, that started the decommunization, dismantled monuments to Lenin after the Maidan Revolution, and commemorates now the memory of Golodomor, forced starvation under Stalin. And this genocide was recognized by many countries, and Georgia and Moldova too. I'm not sure about Kazakhstan. You will correct me, Mr. Vasilenko, if Kazakhstan recognizes it. So my question is, where are your respective countries on this scale between these 2 extreme visions of Soviet history? How does this past continue to define your identity, your present, and what's the influence of the Soviet period on your national identity today? And 30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, can we still speak about the post-Soviet space? Is it still united with the only factor that continue to keep this space together is the relationship, bilateral relationship with Russia, with different kind of pressure on energy, other security, and other different matters? So how do you define yourself today, this space, and you in this space? I will start with Mr. Vasilenko.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Tatiana. Yes, indeed, 30 years have passed since the end of the Soviet Union, and by now, more than 50% of Kazakhstan's population is under 30 years of age. So they don't know how it was under the Soviet Union, and they basically, like the entire country, are looking into the future. Going back to history, although, it was a complex history of us living under the Soviet Union, and true, there were positive things, but there were also negative things, and one only need to mention collectivization, which caused the deaths of half of the population in Kazakhstan in the early 30s, or the Soviet nuclear weapons testing in eastern part of Kazakhstan, etc., or the location of gulags in Kazakhstan and the exile of dozens of ethnicities to our country. So today, we would like to think of this space, as you call it, as our neighborhood. And the neighborhood and the neighbors with whom we need to build relations, of course, mindful of our common history in the past, of our common geography today, but also mindful of our common future, which we need to build together.
Thank you very much. Olga Roshko from Moldova.
Thank you. I think that language defines reality, so what we call it, to a certain extent, would define what it becomes. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the countries, the 15 republics resulting after that were called the newly independent states. Obviously, 31 years on, we no longer call them newly independent. The Commonwealth of Independent States is not as relevant or appropriate, right? The post-Soviet or former Soviet Union, that's the parts that we, Moldova, have not chosen, and we don't necessarily see that it defines us now. So the preference is that we use the present and the future to define ourselves. So I would rather hear, instead of post-Soviet Moldova, an EU-hopeful Moldova, or candidate for EU membership Moldova, or reform-oriented Moldova, Western-leaning Moldova, shall I say, freedom-loving Moldova. So pick what you prefer.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the language. Can you remember just to our audience the percentage, the number of people speaking, Russian-speaking people in your respective countries?
Well, in Kazakhstan, it's almost everybody, basically. And we pursue the trilingual policy of everybody needing to speak Kazakh, state language, Russian, but also learning English.
And for you, Olga, for your country?
It's a hard question, because many people are indeed bilingual. If we were to look at the ethnic minorities, then we have Ukrainians, we have Russians, we have Gagauz, who are ethnic Turks, but are quite Russian-speaking. So I would say, whereas many people are bilingual, around 30% would choose Russian as their first language.
Thank you very much. Vice Minister Darsalia, the floor is yours now with the same question about your national identity in the place of Soviet history.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Frankly speaking, I was preparing to answer a lot of questions, but this is the question I have no idea how to answer. Because I don't know what is Soviet. So it's difficult for me to answer what is post-Soviet. When talking about the Georgia, it's definitely, for me, it's something like, for example, answering the question, that's how to say, is France post-British Empire because during 100 years in Middle Ages it was occupied by Britain or something. So it's so distant from us that in spite of 30 years, that I definitely would not qualify Georgia as the post-Soviet country. And only space where we can talk about post-Soviet, if something's like this, and if there is such concept behind, there is post-Soviet in Russian-occupied territories, and what is anything Soviet, you can refer to these places. But this 80% of Georgia, which is not unoccupied, definitely would not qualify under that. And frankly speaking, it's even a bit not how to say. I would not say insulting, but not proper. After 3 decades, even talking now, are these countries post-Soviet or different?
Thank you, Mr. Darsalia. Of course, I can't not to ask the question about the direct, immediate impact and consequences of the war in Ukraine on your countries, migrants, sanctions, energy, transit of gas and oil. And at the same time, I would like to ask you what conclusion do you draw from this impact, these consequences for the medium and long term in the search of other means to guarantee security, stability, sovereignty, and territorial integrity in your countries? China's guarantees for Kazakhstan, European Union membership for Moldova and Georgia on neutrality, non-alignment status. What conclusions do you make in terms of diversification of economic and energy partnership and new transit routes? I will start again with Mr. Vasilenko.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the impact of this war, this very tragic war, has been quite strong on Kazakhstan as well. And you mentioned several areas where our economy, our society has been impacted, and this includes indeed the disruption of the traditional technological and transport and logistics chains, the higher, enormously high inflation, I would say, of almost 20% already this year, or the influx of the about 100,000 Russian citizens to Kazakhstan, which also created an impact on our labor market. But the way we want to approach this and the way we approach this situation is by focusing on 3 points. One is building up stronger political institutions. And of course, we had our own share of upheaval in the beginning of this year, which prompted our president to went into an overdrive in terms of introducing political reforms. So one area is strengthening our political institutions, strengthening and the mandate for the president, and generally building up a more competitive political system, which we think will strengthen the country going forward. The second area of focus is a stronger economy, which is more diversified, away from the dependence on hydrocarbons, which are still 30 years after the beginning of independent development, the major driving force of our economy, unfortunately, and building a more diversified, robust system of international transportation routes that do not rely solely on one route, however beneficial and direct and quick it used to be. I mean, the route, the northern route via Russia, which has seen its own share of disruptions and a reduction of 40% of goods transported along this route this year alone. That is why, along with the EU, we are developing the middle corridor. In fact, that will be the sort of project of the next decade as we build connections to Europe across the Caspian Sea, across South Caucasus, including Azerbaijan and Georgia and then Turkey. And the third answer, I think, is by building a stronger international institutions. So we are just as committed as we used to be to the multilateralism and the institutions that we have been building in our region and globally.
Thank you very much. Just a question. During the last visit of President Tokayev, just after the election in Moscow, there is a kind of energy union that was announced with Kazakhstan, Russia, and Uzbekistan. And just a few days after that, it seems that the project ended without starting. Can you explain a little bit what was the idea in the beginning and why it failed?
Well, and still is an idea of a gas alliance of some sort, because we are all of our 3 countries are gas producers. But our idea is to look at it carefully. Of course, since the beginning of the war, we have made it clear that any initiatives that will be seen as helping circumvent the sanctions levied on Russia will not be welcomed by Kazakhstan, and we do not support circumventing the sanctions. But we do not support sanctions as a matter of principle, but that's besides the point at the moment. But our idea is to continue to open up our economy through privatizations, through attraction of European investments, Western investments, Chinese investments, if you will. In fact, after Moscow, President Tokayev visited Paris, where a total of 35 commercial agreements were signed during his visit and during his following his meeting with President Macron. So that's the answer to your first question about how we want to diversify, strengthen our economy, given what's going on.
Thank you very much. Olga, the same, my second question for you about the immediate consequences and the conclusion that you can make for the mid and long terms.
Russia's war against Ukraine affects Moldova dramatically. Obviously, nothing compares to the suffering that Ukraine is going through. But in Moldova, the war on our doorstep affects every single person. On 2 occasions, already fragments of missiles landed on our territory. Russian missiles violated our airspace. When Russia is bombing Ukraine's vital infrastructure, we experience blackouts. On 1 occasion, the entire country was plunged into darkness. Obviously, energy is being weaponized as part of a hybrid war. Russia's Gazprom has halved natural gas supplies to Moldova. That has also jeopardized our access to traditional sources of electricity supplies. That forced us to go into the EU market and source both electricity and gas at European prices, something that's completely prohibitive for our state budget and for our population. In the past 12 months, the gas price has increased 7 times and electricity 4 times. We're obviously looking for some social schemes to cushion the impact of rising prices on the population. But in addition to that, prices on absolutely everything have skyrocketed, including because of the blockade of Odessa, which has disrupted all of our supply chains. Our farmers have also lost access to markets. What we are doing, we're building resilience across these 3 sets of challenges. On security, we're modernizing our defenses, working with partners. On energy, we're investing in our energy security. We're building electricity connections with European Union. We are sourcing gas from elsewhere. Now, reverse flow is accessible. The pipeline with Romania has been operational and is in use for a while. And then, of course, on the economic side, we're looking at staged access to EU single market, further liberalization, so that we can demonstrate to citizens that European integration works and it works now, and they can start benefiting from it already now before the full accession.
Thank you, Olga. Vice Minister Darsalia, same question.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. While Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion in Ukraine had the direct impact on Georgia's security environment, first of all. You know that Georgia was and is actually the target of Russia's hybrid war. And not only. In 90s and in 2008, we fought wars with Russia, which ended up with occupation of Georgia's territory, 20% of Georgia's territory, where Russia had a significant military presence. But after the war, they have to reduce some military presence on the ground and send some military towards Ukraine. But they tried to compensate it with the increased pressure of the special services on the ground. Unfortunately, situation on the ground is not even static, but it's fast deteriorating when it refers to humanitarian and human rights situation.
Yes, thank you very much.
People who are living on the... Yes.
Yes, you can continue.
You are...
Sorry.
Yeah. People who are living on the ground literally are used as hostages to make the pressure on government of Georgia. Yeah. So the situation on the ground is deteriorating fast. And this is not only about the occupied territories, but we see increased pressure on Georgia and all these hybrid tools, which previously was applied also on the rest of the Georgia as well. So generally saying, the security situation significantly deteriorated. And here I also want to refer, as the colleagues from our partner countries also mentioned, but at the same time, Georgia's strategic geographic location makes us a natural bridge between West and East at the same time. Serving as a gateway actually for 8 landlocked countries of South Caucasus and Central Asia. A crucial link on EU's global connectivity map, and game changer when it comes to diversification of transport routes and energy supplies to Europe.
Thank you very much. I will jump in with the question about hybrid war. Can you detail a little bit more and speak especially about information war? Do you still have media in Russian?
Well, Georgia is actually one of these rare places where we don't have Russian media outlets. We have several actually, but they are not the major ones or broadcasting nationwide. They are mostly on internet based. But at the same time, I want to say that a lot of Russian opposition outlets, bloggers, and so on are operating from Georgia.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the same question to Kazakhstan and to Moldova about hybrid threats and about information war? I think Moldova, you closed the talk show in Russian, but not all kind of distraction broadcasting.
It's true, some Russian channels are still available in Moldova, but not the news bulletins. However, what poses a bigger challenge is the so-called homegrown disinformation when Russian proxies in Moldova own TV channels to propagate their narrative about the war. So currently, the statistics shows that around 30% of population sees Russia's war against Ukraine through the prism of Russian propaganda, which of course we spare no effort to counter. Including looking at the media ownership and putting stricter controls in place.
Thank you, Olga. What about you, Mr. Vasilyenko,
Well, in
about your country?
Yeah, in Kazakhstan we do have Russian channels available, but so is Euronews, and so is BBC, so is CNN. But I will tell you that in Kazakhstan, the media itself works in Kazakh, but also Russian languages, in addition to 10 other languages of some other ethnic groups, such as Germans who live in Kazakhstan. So the challenge for us is to strengthen the informational independence, if you will, and to strengthen the resilience and the professionalism and the appeal of the Kazakh own media.
Thank you very much. I have a specific question about migrants. Moldova, you received many people from Ukraine, especially Kazakhstan and Georgia, from Russia after the announcement of so-called partial mobilization. How did you manage this enormous flow of migrants? How can they be integrated? Do you think they will stay? Will they leave? Are you a country of transit for this migrant, or the country where they can stay for a longer time? Can I start with Mr. Dasalia?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say that talk about the Ukrainian refugees and then from other countries. I just want to say that Georgia is strongly supporting Ukraine generally, but as one of the dimension of that was the Ukrainian refugees which are in Georgia, and the government of Georgia is helping these people who are there. It's several tens of thousands, actually, a small amount. And there is a different program to support it, including not only physically supporting these people, but for example, in several Georgian schools are operating in Ukrainian now for the children who are from this region, who are from Ukraine. But the major thing I want to say is that a lot of people, especially it was true in the beginning of the war, who were in Russia cannot go back to Ukraine, came to Georgia, Ukrainians, I mean. And we are continuing this support, of course. Now, regarding the people from Russia or other countries, well, there are several things which is important to mention. First of all, so it's important to understand that this citizens of Russia is one thing, but we have to divide into different groups. You know that Russia has significant Georgian diaspora. It's around 800,000 according to the different figures. And Georgia is, just for comparison, 3.7 million. We are talking about the people who lived in 90s. I'm not talking about these traditional diasporas from different centuries. And a lot of them who are coming are Georgians, ethnic Georgians, who still have links to Georgia. This is one group. The other group is basically who are coming in the other neighboring countries of Georgia, later living for this. So ethnic Armenians, ethnic Azerbaijanis, there is a significant part which is fleeing the regime on the ground, and there is the other fourth part which is using Georgia for a transit. Actually, 2/3 of the people who are coming from Georgia after 2-3 weeks are leaving Georgia. So we understand that this could be generally with some risks, but these arguments are was more important during the discussion how Georgia have to deal with this issue.
Thank you, Vice Minister Darsalia. Vice Minister Vasilenko.
Yes, well, when Russian citizens come to Kazakhstan, of course, they come into a country where Russian is also an official language, prescribed so in the constitution, along with the Kazakh language, which is a state language. So that is one reason they do not face any challenge in terms of communicating. Secondly, of course, out of the 19 million people in Kazakhstan, 3.5 million are ethnic Russians. So that is another reason why the influx of so far about 100,000 ethnic Russians to Kazakhstan has not been that dramatic. Initially, in September, especially when this partial draft was called, we had about 400,000 coming to Kazakhstan, but for now we believe about 100,000 remain. These are people who, a lot of them, who bring their work with them. They are IT specialists, they work online, and through the years of the pandemics we all learned that it is possible to work remotely, so that's what they do. But not all of them are IT specialists, so there are other professions, and they seek jobs, and that creates some pressure on the labor market, but it's not huge. What I think is important also to underline is that these people, when they come to Kazakhstan, they also get immersed in our own culture of living in a very diverse ethnically or religiously society that has more than 100 ethnic groups or 17 religions. And that is I think, is quite helpful for them to see with their own life, with their own eyes, what life is like in Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much. Olga, what about Moldova? I think you are a small country, but in terms of the percentage of migrants, it was just a huge part, especially just after the beginning of the war in Ukraine.
Indeed, since the onset of the war, Moldova was called a small country with big heart. After thousands of refugees have come to Moldova. So since the beginning of the war, about almost 700,000 Ukrainian refugees have crossed our borders. At the peak, those who stayed represented about 4% of our population. Currently, the number is stabilized at around 80,000. Some people have moved on to the European Union. Some people have returned to Ukraine once Russian army left Kyiv. Now, this, of course, has put a lot of strain on our municipal services, on our healthcare, on our education, on our electricity consumption, for that matter, and obviously the border management.
Thank you. I have another common question for all of you about regional organizations and extra-regional organizations, because the WPC, it's about the global governments, the regional governance. So it's very important to speak about the different regional and global organizations. Kazakhstan is part of almost all regional organizations, unlike Georgia and Moldova. So my questions will be different. For Kazakhstan, which regional organization will survive this war in Ukraine? The Eurasian Economic Union is very affected by sanctions. The Collective Security Treaty Organization had a moment of kind of glory in January with a peacekeeping operation in Kazakhstan. But on the other hand, it remains powerless in the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh and the conflict on the border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. In mid-October, Kyrgyzstan announced the cancellation of the military exercises planned with the framework of Collective Security Treaty Organization. And what about the community of independent states? Is the war in Ukraine the last nail in the coffin of this organization? And on the other hand, the organizations that go beyond the region seems to be doing quite well. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but also the Conference for Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia. So how do you see things? And then I will formulate question for Georgia and Moldova.
Well, Kazakhstan, being the largest landlocked country and being the country that is neighboring Russia and China, has ever since its independence pursued a multi-vector foreign policy, a balanced approach to our foreign policy, which, among other things, prioritizes the internationalization of our international relations, meaning the establishment, the relevant and the needed international organizations. And that is why Kazakhstan has been the founder of many of the organizations you mentioned, or the initiator even, such as the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia, which is an OEC-type organization for Asia that we initiated 30 years ago. But I will perhaps highlight the example of the Eurasian Economic Union, a brainchild of Kazakhstan's leadership, two established in Kazakhstan in 2014. For us, that is first and foremost an economic organization, because we want to have closer ties to the outside world, and that union, it helped remove the customs borders within the union. That is why it was one of the major reasons for the success of the China to Europe land-based transportation across Kazakhstan over the past 10 years before this war began. So we will continue to support these organizations. We will continue to pursue our own national interests, and you may have seen our President Tokayev addressing the Eurasian Economic Union leadership just yesterday in neighboring Kyrgyzstan, where he prioritized economic cooperation first and foremost. So we will support these institutions. We think each and every one of them plays their own role. I don't think it's the matter of which one survives. Each and every one of them has their own challenges, indeed. CSTO played a role in helping Kazakhstan overcome its own internal turmoil in January. And yes, within this institution, there are some ongoing challenges and discussions about its future direction or its future meaning, but we believe they have a role to play. We don't need to forget, of course, that Afghanistan is not far away from Central Asia and from Kazakhstan, and that is a top priority for several institutions which you mentioned, including CSTO or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So, I mean, however tragic that war is, there are numerous challenges outside of Ukraine, and Afghanistan being one of them, or illegal migration being another one, climate change is another one. So we will continue to strengthen and participate in all institutions as long as that is in our national interest.
Thank you very much. I will reformulate the question for Moldova and Georgia. Of course, for you, the main questions today is the relationship with European Union and NATO. Moldova is now the candidate. How do you see the path toward membership? What are you doing for that now? And how many time it can take?
Indeed, European integration and European membership is an absolute priority for the current government. This is also the mandate that the government got from the citizens. So we spend no effort to press on with reforms despite all the challenges that I have described before. We are aware that there are no shortcuts. We're committed to hard work. We're committed to reforms. When the European Union granted us the candidate status, the Commission recommended 9 steps that we need to take. We're currently implementing this action plan. About 1/3 of this work is done. We have created a National Commission for European Integration, which is chaired by the President, which includes civil society. And it oversees the progress of reforms that pave the way to European Union. Now these are wide-ranging steps that we need to take. Most of them are in the justice sector, also tackling the influence of oligarchs in the media sphere and the political life and in the economy. We are also building up administrative capacity to deliver on these reforms. So just last week, we were recruiting about 24 new positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and obviously preparing for accession negotiations, just preparing the ground, creating working groups, and creating coordination mechanisms for that.
Thank you very much, Olga. Mr. Darsalia, I will put it bluntly. Are you disappointed not to have been accepted as candidate when you expressed your European orientation very early? How do you see the relationship with the European Union in the mid and long term?
Well, we very clearly said, first of all, that it's still step. We already made one step, which is granting Georgia the European perspective. So this is first step. I would not hide, expectations was more, considering the Georgia's achievements during all these last 2-3 decades. And we really hope that when the decision will be made next year, it will be merit-based decision, and Georgia will make there as well. And it's very well, from our side, we are very committed to continue this path of reform. We started this reform not only because of our goal of membership, but this is first of all for our nation. And Georgia is committed, the whole political class in Georgia is committed to continue on this path, and we really are hope and are sure that during the next decision, Georgia will make the next step on this path. But generally talking about the European and Euro-Atlantic perspective, I want to say that Georgia has 2 red lines. This is territorial integrity and European and Euro-Atlantic integration. This is very clear, and this is really red line. This is not neither pink or any other color. There is conventional agreement even about this in Georgia. And I'm saying conventional because we have it in our constitution. Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic aspiration, as well as territorial integrity, which is existential for any country. And first of all, this is, and I'm saying together European and Euro-Atlantic, because this is not for us not only choice of welfare or security, but this is first of all choice of values and to which part of the world, to which civilization we belong to. So that's why it is a red line for Georgians as well. And generally saying, I want to say a few words about the international order. Generally, Georgia strongly supports multilateralism as such. And I really hope that when we are back to re-establish European security architecture, or when we are back to correct all this damage which was done by the invasion in Ukraine to the international system, the multilateralism as a principle will be the one which will be even more strengthened. And that is, if talking about which organization Georgia supports, Georgia generally supports multilateralism. And the organizations which will be part of the multilateralism will survive, we hope.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darsale, because you built a perfect bridge to my next question. We spoke about your identity, we spoke about region. Now it's time to speak about your global visions. The invasion of Ukraine represents the most serious breakdown in the international order in several decades, and Russia's goal is to break, apparently, the world order that it considered to be under American domination, and Russia seeks to create a multipolar order. How do you see the world order at the end of this war? Which elements for you can be structuring democracy against illiberal regimes, China against the United States? We discussed here a lot about that. The industrial north against the global south. How will it affect your region and your country? What role for different international organizations do you see, especially, of course, for United Nations, the Council of Security of United Nations, that is quite helpless in this war, and OSCE, in which all three of you are members. What are your strengths and your weaknesses in this coming world order? For you, Mr. Vasylenko.
Thank you. Well, we think that multilateralism, as our Georgian colleague just mentioned, is the only way for the mankind to advance, to survive, if you will. We live in an increasingly interdependent world, and even the pandemic has again showed us how interdependent we all are. If we talk about where we stand, of course, for democracy, for market economy. We stand for the international rule of law, international law primarily, written down, clearly spelled out, and that is also, by the way, a difference between the so-called international rules-based order. We stand for the international law, a law that is written, that is agreed upon by everybody. But we also stand for the international cooperation, and when we talk about the UN, I guess I'm reminded of the quote by Churchill about democracy being the worst form of government except for every other that the mankind has tried. The UN too is not perfect, of course, but that's the best institution that we have had for the past 77 years now, and we need to maybe perhaps reinvent the UN, but we need the UN, we need to strengthen the UN. And likewise, we need the OSCE as a platform that has been instrumental in almost 50 years of its existence. It is going through also an existential crisis right now because of the breakdown of communications between the West and Russia on that platform as well. But we, as a country that in the past chaired the OSCE in 2010, brought together all leaders of the OSCE participating states to Astana, where they recommitted themselves to the vision of a united, indivisible Euro-Atlantic and Euro-Asian security. Of course, that vision is now has been put aside, diplomatically speaking, unfortunately, but we think that institution too has not gone out of its sort of lifespan. It needs to be supported. We want to support it, and we will continue to support the OSCE.
Thank you very much, Olga, for your country.
I'd certainly echo the colleague here and the need for effective multilateralism and how we all need to work together on various platforms. And one thing that what made me think when you mentioned the pandemic has also taught us that nobody's safe until everybody's safe. And I think this is currently what we're talking about in Europe when we're all faced with the very negative effects of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So in that whole multilateral architecture of the world and Europe, currently there is this emerging European political community, which Moldova will be hosting in June. Originally, the idea of President Macron, now the debut meeting took place in Prague in October under the auspices of the European Council. So this is yet another platform to consolidate dialogue at the top level between European leaders and see how we can strengthen our collective security.
Thank you, Olga. Vice Minister Darsalia, you started to speak about multilateralism. Have you something to add to global vision of Georgia?
Yes, thank you very much. As you mentioned, I partially actually answered this question, and we believe that we will have back the international community based on, we will have rules-based international system again. We will have where the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the countries are respected, where democracy's governance is where the human rights issues are the priority. We really hope that we will have back this international system, and within this, from the Georgian perspective, we believe that the problems of countries like Georgia, of our size, that again the size or geographical location will not be the key to decide, or geopolitical environment will be key to decide to which part of the world countries belong, but according to democracy, human rights, respecting the international rules will be the key where the countries are. And that's from Georgian perspective how we see it. But we really hope, and I hope that it's not wishful thinking, that we will have the international system back based on the international rules, based on the Helsinki principles, all the principles of international law which we built after Second World War, and which is significantly challenged today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darsalia. I'm sorry, I thought we had a quarter of hour, but we have just 5 minutes, so I will proceed in this manner. We will have a kind of, not blitzkrieg, but blitz questions. 3 participants, 3 questions, 30 seconds for one question, 30 seconds for the answer. I'm sorry to proceed in this way. I see 1 question here. 2 questions more. 2, and the third, adjugé. 1, 2, 3. Oui, yes, and behind. Yeah, the third one. Very, very shortly, please, Mr. Kazachkin.
Yeah, a quick question to Madam Roska. What has happened in Transnistria since February 24? What has changed?
Thank you. The second question.
It will make life easier. It's also about Transnistria, but what's the future of Transnistria? Thank you.
Okay, 2 questions on Transnistria. Other question? Just a few minutes. Yes, please. Please, ma'am.
So, yes, I would like to know what is the situation in Armenia. I'm sorry, but we had a situation there a couple of weeks ago. So what does it look like now? Thanks.
Just sorry, we don't have the Armenian participant here, but maybe if our participants have an idea, you can say. So a little bit less than 4 minutes, Olga, we will start with you.
Right. Transnistria, of course, Moldova's breakaway region remains a source of instability, a source of insecurity. 1,600 Russian troops are stationed there illegally. The negotiations are currently on hold due to the war, but we do maintain the dialogue just to make sure that all tensions are diffused and the solutions for pressing problems of people on both banks of the river are addressed. The situation remains calm, but of course the risk is there, and that's important to remember that.
Thank you, Olga. On Armenia, maybe.
Oh, the future, sorry. The future of Transnistria, I think the reintegration, the way we see the reintegration of the country is that it goes hand in hand with Moldova's EU integration. And as we get closer to the EU and the proposition of the authorities on the right bank of Dnistr River is becoming more attractive and we manage to create greater prosperity, that will make us more attractive for some sort of rapprochement and eventual reintegration.
Yes, thank you. On Armenia, Mr. Zarsali, Mr. Vasilenko, do you have an idea? I know it's not your country. Maybe you are the neighbor, Mr. Zarsali. It will be for you.
There are our good neighbors, but it will not be correct for me to talk about our neighbors. But I really want, if I have 30 use my 30 seconds, if it is possible, talking about not Transnistria, but about generally about the occupied territories or the conflicts in different areas on as you all said, post-Soviet space. So I think that it was a really good question if generalizing about the situation, and in a sense that, we have the significant challenges of the whole European security, which started much before the Russian invasion in the Ukraine. And when this is over, as we all want it to be over in that way, I think we have to address all these problems of the international and European security. And I think when asking what is the future is under the general restoration of European security, based on the international principles. This is territorial integrity, this is human rights, first of all. In case of Georgia, we have 80% of population of these territories out of Georgia, out of these territories, because they were ethnically cleansed during the several waves of ethnic cleansing. So restoration of justice, restoration of human rights, first of all, and restoration of territorial integrity, this is the future. Or we don't have proper international system generally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zarsali. I think it's a perfect timing to finish. Thank you so much, Roman Vasilenko, Olga Roshka, Lasha Zarsali. And I wish we can see you next year, and I hope next year we will speak not about the war, but about the peace. Thank you.